Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, the podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today, I'm welcoming yet another CEO to the show. Janice Lintz is an accomplished consultant and changemaker who works across the hearing access, advocacy, and related political spectrum. She's the CEO of Hearing Access and Innovations, a leading company dedicated to helping the world's businesses, entertainment institutions, government agencies, and mass transit organizations improve their accessibility for people with hearing loss. Janice is also a consumer education, travel, and food writer. She's written for Forbes magazine. She's also visited 194 Travelers Century Club destinations, and she's on a quest to visit every single country in the world. Listen to this episode to discover why Janice chose to change the world versus lower her standards. She also shares her number one tip to develop a mindset of never giving up. Let's head on over to the interview. All right, welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, a podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Janice Lintz on the podcast. Janice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric, so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled. I'm excited to have you on here. And I think you bring a really unique piece to the Eric Mueller Show here because of your background, and you're currently an entrepreneur in hearing accessibility space. Would you share a little bit about what you do and maybe the background as far as why, or what pushed you into that space? What made you pursue that?
Absolutely. I entered the space as an unwittingly candidate. It wasn't like I picked this. It picked me. My daughter was diagnosed with a hearing loss. And when the doctor told me there were, right after the diagnosis, she said to me, "Don't worry, there are special schools for her." I hadn't even wrapped my head around the diagnosis when already the bar for my daughter's entire life was lowered. And I didn't really understand this, nor was I interested in joining this group. So I decided it was easier to change the world than to change my standards. And that's what I set about doing once I got my daughter situated with her hearing aids.
Yeah. And I mean, you really thrust yourself into just thinking about what aspects of the world need to be changed to meet those needs. Not let's lower the bar, but let's set our goals higher and just, keep ourselves at the same standard as just everybody else because, the world's moving that direction for everyone else. So why should it not for everybody that has, either hearing disability or visual disability? So I think, that's very inspirational.
Thank you. It was a really selfish endeavor. I just didn't want to be part of this group that I just felt like the bar was so low and it was just not something that I was interested in. And I didn't understand why suddenly a diagnosis changed my friend group, my daughter's school group. I didn't understand why our whole life had to dramatically change. So it really was easier to change the world than change my standards. Like I say that, and it sounds like a joke, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
I was just not changing my life and how we led it. And so we didn't. I decided to change the world, and I have. And I think my friends thought at the time I was kidding. And I was like, I think they've come to realize now, no, I was not kidding.
Yeah.
I think now they love me long enough and they're like, no, she really doesn't joke about things like this.
You were serious about it. Yeah. And you were actually honored People magazine, Heroes Among Us, back in 2008. You were actually featured in that magazine regarding this experience with your daughter and things like that. So I think that's awesome too. I mean, you're getting, recognition from it. That had to be kind of a surreal experience to be featured in a magazine like that.
It was really strange because I really had called the magazine to ask them to profile at the time a celebrity who had hearing loss. And I thought we could raise the profile of hearing loss if we had celebrities who had hearing loss profiled in the magazine. And People magazine wasn't really particularly interested in the person I had suggested. But then the writer wanted to know why I was so interested in the topic. And when I explained what I was doing, she said, we're not interested in the person you recommended, but we'd like to profile you. And I was like, no, I don't think you understand. I'm not a celebrity.
Yeah.
I don't belong in People magazine. Why would you possibly want to profile me? And she said, because we'd like to have you among the heroes among us. And I said, I'm not a hero. And I still didn't really understand it, because this was really just a way for our family to function. If you live in New York City, there's no way you cannot go to all the wonderful cultures. And well, apparently you can during the pandemic, but in non-pandemic times, I wanted to partake in museums, theaters. That's why I live in New York. And that's why I love traveling around the United States. I wanted to be able to go to like national parks and see everything. And we couldn't, because the access wasn't in place. So I did this because it was selfish. I wanted to enjoy life, and I wanted my daughter to have the richness of life. So when People Magazine said, yep, that's why we want to include you, I was really quite shocked and surprised and truly honored by it.
Yeah, that's quite an honor. And you talk about the solutions that you wanted to discover, and you wanted to be a solution to that problem for people like your daughter that are facing that challenge of having a hearing disability, or having hard of hearing, or what have you. So in comes your company, Hearing Access and Innovation. So share with us just how that came about, and what were the steps you took as an entrepreneur to bring that dream to fruition and to create those solutions to those problems.
Well, it started out that I was doing advocacy, and I've done advocacy for 19 years. And then post-divorce, the judge in my divorce decided this was my new company. And so it became a company, because this is what the judge decided in my divorce, that I now had a company, which was a little odd. This was not meant to be my business anymore. That this was just about our family functioning. Mm-hmm. And so I started working with companies to help them become accessible. And the one thing that I did believe is there is this perception among companies that people with hearing loss or their parents should provide information to companies on how to meet those needs. Companies like Apple call it feedback. It's not feedback, that's consulting services. And people with disabilities and their parents deserve to be paid for those services, because you hire, companies like Apple hire interior decorators and architects to build their stores. Adding access is another layer within the business. And somehow, they don't think they need to pay people, that people should be doing this out of the graciousness of their heart. And it's kind of like Taylor Swift had said, we don't ask you for free music or phones or AirPods, to paraphrase her. Don't ask me for free music, when she was discussing Apple Music, using her music for free, downloading for free. And it's the same thing. You don't give me free phones. Why are you asking me to work for free and constantly, fix the problems that companies have? And so I felt that this was an important precedent to start, that companies had to start paying for this information. Otherwise, just hire, when they're building stores out or museums, there should be another layer. Just like they figure out how to turn on the electricity, they should be hiring consultants. But the biggest problem is that the consultants they hire focus on when they hire disability consultants, they hire people who focus on wheelchair access, because in order for them to open the doors, they need to get a certificate of occupancy, a C of O. And physical access is built into the building codes, and hearing access is not. It's built into programmatic access. So consultants who focus on disability access tend to focus on the physical access. And then when dollars are running tight, the place they slash is the places that they could still open their doors and it won't be noticed, and maybe one day they'll get to it. And the first place they slash is the hearing access. And so then when people have to complain, you have people who have to work for free. And I really resented it. And I was tired of having to explain to the same architectural firms. You had a architectural firm who built, added the extension to the Morgan Museum. And suddenly they're building the Academy Museum in LA. And suddenly they forgot the access that they put in New York City, or they forgot, they did other museums in New York City with hearing access, or I worked with the same Renzo Piano in Greece. And suddenly they forgot about that same access because they worked in silos and teams and the teams didn't communicate. And somehow it became my problem to connect their teams. And it was like, why is a mother having to work for free because your teams can't communicate? And it's just not appropriate. And I deserve to be paid.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this conflict of, are you an advocate or a consultant, and why are the two mutually exclusive? If you file a complaint about the lack of access, people think you're drumming up business. And there has to be, the problem with the ADA is it's a federally unfunded mandate with no teeth. You know, when you go in many cities, you see restaurants with letter grades on health departments, right? Where you see the restaurants in A, B, C, or fail. There is no buddy running around checking to see what the access is for people with disabilities. And so it's a federally unfunded mandate with no teeth, and suddenly it falls on parents. And then you have to file complaints and basically tell companies or museums what they're doing wrong and give them a play-by-play. Because if you don't, then it doesn't get done. So you're basically becoming a free consultant. And then the places say this is a free feedback. And this is an untenable position. And nor does anybody want to do this repeatedly, because imagine if you had to sit and file complaints one after another of every single time there's a problem. It's exhausting. And then, you know, it's making sure, are you with the right agency? Do you go to, the ADA is overseen by two different agencies, the U.S. Access Board and the Department of Justice. But it's not always. Sometimes it could be, if it's in the airport, the DOT, or the Department of Transportation, or the FAA. Or it could even be the Appropriations Committee, as I found with the Smithsonian. And then you have local, state, and city organizations. And then in some states, you can go to the Attorney General, like in New York, but in another state, like Colorado, you may not be. And so it becomes like figuring out this maze of government agencies is really difficult.
Yeah. And you used your background in business and law degree, your experience as a litigator to, bring to the table and be this go-to person on all these matters related to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So I think, the backbone of your business really is rooted in that expertise you have on the situation as a whole.
It's interesting. I really barely practiced law because when I had my daughter, I had a son who died, and then my daughter almost died and then had a hearing loss. So I barely practiced law. My training, and I don't practice law per se because I'm on retirement status. So I never give legal advice, but, I am really, I would say, trained in keeping track, and I'm super organized in keeping track of all of the different things, but it is really complicated. And for a layperson to sit and navigate this complex architecture of the ADA is really, really tough. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think businesses many times count on it. But I think they're focusing on the wrong idea of viewing it as compliance. I view it as companies should provide excellent customer service. And it's really important for all businesses to give excellent customer service to all their customers, including people with disabilities. So even if, let's say, you throw out the ADA, you want to know that your company is providing great customer service. And it should not be just something as a nice thing to have. It should be as a way to make sure all your customers feel like their needs are being met, because that's what keeps people returning.
Sure. Yeah, it keeps them coming back. If you're providing them with that service that, they've grown to expect from your business. I think that's a big piece that, to hammer home here, to just know that if you are a business owner or a aspiring entrepreneur, wherever you're at in the process, you're probably going to be serving people with either service or product. And if you can't convince them to come back, that your business is going to suffer. And a big way to do that in the brick and mortar space is customer service. So I think that's a great point there, Janice. Do you have any tips for people listening? If they are business owners, or, how can you improve your customer service? Any, roadmaps and how you can do that?
Well, one is to understand that hearing access is, I was on the phone with someone today. Focus on the end user. if you want to have, it's really expensive for customer retention. Getting new customers costs a lot of money. So if you have customers, it's cheaper to keep your customers than to go out and find new customers.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can keep your customers is by focusing on the end user and providing excellent customer service. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure your customers can hear, because if they can't hear the message, they're not going to buy what you're selling.
Yeah.
So for people with hearing loss, one of the easiest ways to do, I mean, when you view that 1 in 5 teens has some form of hearing loss, 48 million people have some form of hearing loss, 46 million hard of hearing. One of the easiest ways to reach people who are hard of hearing, who wear hearing aids or cochlear implants, is to use something called an induction loop in your stores or at your service counters that allows the person with hearing loss to hear the sound directly in their hearing aids or cochlear implants from the speaker. And what's crazy is you see this access in London, you see it in Israel, and for some reason, stores here have not added the same access, which is really bizarre. And it's a culture. It's part of it is it's a culture of it's about us versus them. In
Sure.
Israel and in the UK, it's about us. In the United States, it's about them. And I think we need to change that mindset, because people with hearing loss don't travel in packs. There's this perception like, oh, if you have a hearing loss, you only travel with people with hearing loss. No, it's your friends and family. Every family has someone in it with hearing loss. So if your family can't hear, you're not going to go back, right?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
appreciate people and companies that provide great customer service. And when people see the ear symbol indicating that an induction loop is available, it sends a message to all customers that we are a welcoming place of service.
And you helped to do that in New York City specifically. I remember reading in your background that you were able to work with multiple organizations in the city to recommend that these induction loops be used in the subway specifically and in call boxes as part of a stimulus package that President Obama had. So I think that, taking those strides, even in a small, sample size, I mean, New York City is massive, but, one location, you still created lasting change right there.
Yes. So I worked in New York City. So because I live in New York City, I use New York City as a best practice model, adding the access to museums, theaters, subway information booths, taxis, and then expanded it across to other states. Because once you had a model of excellence, right, I could then say, okay, this access is in the Intrepid Museum. It's in places like MoMA. And then go to other states. So like, for example, in Minnesota, it's in the Mill City Museum. In Tennessee, it's in Graceland. In Indiana, it's the Indiana State Museum. But when you say to somebody, oh, it's in these museums in New York, they're name brand recognizable museums, and people understand that. So it's easy if I say the Indiana State Museum, okay, it's in the New York Historical Society. They know that museum because it's a well-known, well-regarded museum, and then they're going to mirror it. The same for Graceland. The owner of Graceland happens, or I don't know if he still owns it, but he did at the time. He lived in New York City. So he had a reference point. And so the people I worked with at the Mill City Museum knew museums in New York. And so they were able to see it, the access. They knew about it at the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. And so once you can get the access in one museum in a state, it's really easy to expand the access across the state. And my goal is for the access to be in all 50 states. And part of the way that we're also expanding the access is through airports. Delta Airlines, as they renovate their airports, is expanding the access. So they have it in Atlanta, they have it in Detroit. And then once people try the access, it just rolls out across the state.
Yeah, and let's use this. Let's segue right into, another topic, another passion of yours, in addition to hearing access, is traveling. So you have a goal to visit every country in the world. You've said you've been to 194 of them thus far.
194 countries, territories, and unrecognized nations.
Yeah.
Or 139 UN countries.
It's all right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about just goal setting and why this milestone is so important to you. You know, you're actually a guru when it comes to earning credit card rewards and airline mileage rewards. You know, what's your secret to that, and why is this milestone of traveling to all these countries so valuable to you?
Well, I think it's I just am a curious person. I want to see every single country. I remember doing, the quintessential post-college backpacking trip. And it was my first time to Europe. And I remember being in France and trying cheese. And, I'm of an older generation. We didn't have the same quality cheese you can get today. Cheese came in a green can or with plastic around it. And I didn't really understand the point of cheese. And then I go to France and I try it, and Italy, and I'm like amazed. And I realized at that point, I wanted to see countries myself, because I've been to so many incredible countries where the perception is one thing and the reality is something else. And I love visiting places and meeting the people. I mean, for example, I was in Saudi Arabia right after the entire Khashoggi incident happened. And I try to stay out of politics and just focus on the people. And when I was in Saudi Arabia, people were so welcoming to me. I had women inviting me to coffee. They had these beautiful rugs that when they go on a picnic, they bring a rug, which I had never seen before. And they bring coffee pots, like literally silver coffee pots. And they were inviting me to their picnics. And I thought, this is so lovely. Like, my perception from the media was one thing, and the reality was something else. And so part of that is seeing all these beautiful and meeting lovely people, trying the food. And also, while I'm traveling, I'm also tracking global best practices of hearing access in various countries. That's how I was able to implement the subways and the taxis in New York, because I saw the access in London. So I'm always working. But one of the ways that I was able to achieve visiting so many countries was frequent flyer points.
Sure.
As you mentioned, I took out 80 credit cards and earned 2.7 million miles on frequent flyer miles. And that enabled me to travel to so many countries.
Yeah.
You always got to figure out, how can you do things better?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that ties in perfectly with, the entrepreneur piece that I want to focus on with this podcast is, like you brought up a great point of the perception and the preconceived notions you have of a place or a thing or an idea could be completely the opposite of what it actually is, what it actually, exists as. So I'm just curious to ask, I mean, how do we understand people better, or how do we know our target customer or target market better? Because it could be totally the opposite of what we think right now.
Honestly, I think it's talking and listening. I was on a call with someone today, and I'm not going to out the company, but this was a major electronic company who, for example, claimed they were Apple compatible. And I was shocked to find out that nobody seemed in the executive office to have a MacBook. And they had never fully tested to see that the monitor, I was buying a monitor. This is a completely different thing. I bought a monitor, and it said it was Mac compatible, and I couldn't get my MacBook to connect to the monitor. And I'm on with the executive office team, and they couldn't figure it out. And apparently no one had a MacBook. Well, I don't understand how a major company, if you say you're Mac compatible, have a MacBook. Test it.
Yeah.
Follow through, right? Like, this doesn't even make sense. It turns out you're missing a wire. And I'm not sure if the company left this out and suddenly realized that you needed an adapter for an HDMI that it didn't say it was missing. But I think most people never follow through. They make statements, but one of the reasons I think I've been successful is I follow through the rabbit hole of, if I say something, I have gone through and tested it out. Or when people say something and I know it's not true, I test it and prove it. It's not true. Mm-hmm. And I think far too many companies are so quick to churn out new product They don't test their customer service online. They don't pick up the phone and call the 1-800 number. So when someone proposes offshoring customer service, I think the CEO should get on the phone and try to call the 1-800 number and see what it's like when customer service is offshored. As an American, it's frustrating, right?
Yeah.
There are language barriers. The people are reading scripts to make sure they stay on message.
Yeah.
That's frustrating when you're calling. I would like to see, right? Like everybody who's ever experienced that is infuriated. And when you have to wonder, like, did anyone fully think this through? Well, yes, it sounds great to save money here. But again, if you are not addressing your customer's need, they are going to move on to another company who does.
Yeah.
And I think some things sound great in theory, but nobody ever tests it out or follows through or checks it out. And I think people need to get back to customer service. I think this country has really moved very far away from customer service. And I think it's starting to hurt companies. And it's time to get back to customer service.
Yeah, and just gets to the core of, just communicating with people. I mean, that's one aspect of my life that I always like to continually improve on, is just being able to communicate with other people and know where they're coming from and know where I'm coming from. And it really just helps, a dynamic, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship. I've found that to be pretty, useful in my life, just being able to communicate openly with people.
Yeah, but I think sometimes it's even more than that. It's like, Google your product. I remember working with a company, Hewlett Packard, and there was all over the internet that every time you use the printer, it would print two-sided, and there was no way to have the printer not print two-sided without unticking a box every single time. And all these people online were having this problem of wasting paper, and it was frustrating. And I contacted the CEO because I'm like, have you seen this problem? This is annoying. And apparently the code was written in India, and the person in India never thought to Google because it's a different culture and Americans like things their way. Well, apparently in that culture, they're more accepting of the way this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even know it was on the internet. And I was truly shocked. They fixed it. They rewrote the code and fixed it. And now you can untick it permanently.
Yeah.
Which is super helpful, right? You stop wasting paper, you stop wasting ink, which is really not cool. But you got to Google your product and check. And if you're having people code in another country, you have to understand the differences of culture to understand that people in different cultures have different perceptions. And if you're selling your product in one country and the person creating the product in another country, there may be a mismatch of values. It's not bad or wrong. It's just different. And if you want to focus on your end user, you actually have to Google your product and stay on top of what the feedback is. And if you see that there's a problem, fix it. This to me seems like common sense, but I think companies are constantly so eager to churn out new products that they're not looking to how to meet their customers' needs.
Yeah, I think remaining on a competitive edge, it seems like. I mean, even that previous example of saying we're Mac compatible without really having a proof of concept of that, I think probably is just, they need to remain on the competitive edge and be, a market, competitor basically. And so if they don't say they're Mac compatible, they're not going to get anybody to buy it who wants to use it for a Mac. But, how many customers bought that product to then find out that how many calls did you create for your call center saying this product doesn't work by not testing it out to begin with? So I think that's a great point.
I spent 5 hours on the phone trying to solve this already. And I mean, not everyone calls the CEO the way I do. I mean, that's my personal MO. If you want to solve a problem, contact the CEO. But it is amazing to me. But I'm seeing this more and more with companies, and it's the same issue, whether it's disability access or any others. Companies are not focusing on the end user the way they used to, and they need to get back to the focusing on the end user. And I think when you focus on the end user and you deliver an excellent product and you actually test out the issues and the claims you claim, customers are more satisfied. And then the reviews come in and you sell more product because you focus on the end user.
Yeah, and you got to keep in mind who your end user is, right? Which target market are you looking at? So, I mean, I think with your company, I mean, hearing access, I mean, that's a pretty niche market of people that, have hearing troubles or, they need to be able to hear better. But I'm curious to ask you if I have, a business where I'm creating a product that is maybe more mass market or, is could theoretically be used by everyone in the US. What, marketing tips or what types of strategies would you take with that to know that I'm targeting the appropriate end user?
Well, one, I would figure out who do you think is your end user, and then make sure that they can actually use it. So, for example, in my monitor situation, right?
Yeah.
I have this monitor. It is not easily set upable, right? And in my opinion, if you have tech people creating the user manual, right? And you can't get, if you can't understand the user manual because it's too tech complicated, you want to make sure, as I joke, that like a grandmother can set up their monitor.
Yeah.
It should be simple. And I think sometimes companies also like get in their own head and they think they're talking to their own audience, and they should open it up to a much more, it's not simplifying it, it's not dumbing it down. It's just bringing clarity to the situation, but focusing on, okay, who is your end user? Are you only targeting tech people? Are you targeting, let's say, for example, on a monitor, lay people who may have no background? Well, if you may have no background, then make that instruction booklet simple so that someone without a tech background can actually understand it.
Yeah, put it in layman's term, basically, right? I mean, make it so it's easily accessible to people. So it kind of comes back to the theme of your company. I mean, you're targeting people that have hearing loss, but that is also going to benefit everybody else. If a company is very, very accessible and can accommodate everybody, that's going to help the experience for everyone as a whole.
But it's also, if you're targeting people with when you're targeting just people, you want to make sure you're targeting people with hearing loss, with physical disabilities. And okay, now what does that mean? How do you make something accessible? So if you have videos online, adding captions to every single video so that they can access it. If you have a storefront, making sure that your service counters have this induction loop. It's walking through, but hiring consultants who have an expertise in the area. You can't just, I find it fascinating. People will hire a disability consultant who says they do everything, which is really hard to do. You would never ask someone of one race to make a decision about another race, but yet we are always asking people of one disability to make decisions about another disability. And people somehow doesn't occur to you that's not an appropriate thing to do until you switch it to race, and then suddenly it becomes clear why that is inappropriate.
Sure. Yeah. No. And Janice, let's take a little bit different angle now here. So we've talked a little bit about your experience as a traveler, and I really just want to kind of dive into that with you being a CEO of your company and also having this burning passion for travel. How do you balance that? I mean, do you have any tips for anybody who is, wants to travel, but also is they're working a full-time job, or maybe they're a student pursuing, I know you're also pursuing a degree at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I guess how would someone navigate that challenge of wanting to travel and get out and see the world, but also have responsibilities, whether it be in business or education?
Well, I start my degree in next July, so I haven't started yet. But one way you can squeeze in vacation time is if you're going to a conference. If your conference is on a Monday, leave Friday night so that you get the weekend. Tag on weekends. Attach meetings across next to long weekends so that you're already in a destination. And even make little holidays when you're on a business trip. It's a little harder now with COVID, but on a business trip, go to dinner and find like whatever the hot spot of dinner. Don't eat in your hotel room. make it as a little vacation meeting. If let's say your meetings and you have a little break between meetings, squeeze in a museum or book a later flight and go to, squeeze in something, that maybe is take a walk around the town or get up early and, take a run around the town. You got to kind of squeeze it in and put in that extra distance. But plenty of people travel for work. And they can do it. But even if you're not traveling for work in your own hometown, I always do walking tours in my hometown. I want to, I'm in New York City, and the best thing is going on great walking tours in different areas. And even if I've already done what I think are all the walking tours, I'll go to the same area with a different guide because different people have different perceptions of the area. Sure, there's some overlap, but you know what? Sometimes also if I hear it twice, I actually remember it. But different people see the same neighborhood and there is so much history. That's a great way to squeeze in just your own neighborhood, going to museums, looking for, fun, odd things in every town. It's a great, you can always squeeze in an opportunity and then at a minimum, go to restaurants from another, cuisine or nationality than you typical. Don't just always do the Italian or French. Seek out every area has people who have immigrated to the area. Go try their specialty and their food. First off, it bridges a culture between, instead of viewing people as outsiders, when you taste their cuisine and you're sitting in the restaurant and you're talking to them, be open and listen and try the food and ask questions about it. People are really happy to explain their food because they really are happy when you are trying to learn about their culture.
Yeah. And I know you love to, talk about the amount of love you have for culture itself. I mean, you by traveling and figuring out, the different ways that you can improve your business, that's one thing, but you just have a love for culture as a whole. So I think that's very inspirational.
Yeah. My favorite thing is, I live in New York City. So there's tons of restaurants. There's tons of neighborhoods. I love going into different neighborhoods and trying food from different cultures. I just think, and then talking to the people. And I have always found that if you come in with a very open mind and you're talking and asking questions about like what to eat, or you're kind of like, nicely peering over to other people, like to see what they're eating, people will see your interest and you can start a conversation and say, I'm just curious what you're eating. It looks so good. And people will tell you. And I've met tons of so many nice people just being really nice and friendly. I think, and whatever you do, if you ask questions with a smile, people are just take it so much warmer when you're asking. They're happy to share their culture. I mean, when you own a restaurant, you love your food. You want people to enjoy the food. And if somebody isn't familiar with that food, people want you to try it. And so they're happy to share with you. And if one of my favorite things is to sometimes ask if there's like either a tasting menu or if you can order small plates so you can try lots of things, not just like one dish. And sometimes I've been in restaurants, even in other countries. I remember, I think it was in Somaliland, where I had one meal and I'm one person. I can only eat so much food. And I wanted to try a lot of dishes. And I asked if I could just buy appetizers of like all these different dishes that were entrees. And the guys just said, you know what? Sure, why not? And so he sold me appetizer portions of entrees so that I could try like 5-6 dishes because he knew I was really interested in sampling everything.
Sure.
And I had like my guide who I was with thought he didn't even know that you could do this. And I'm like, if you don't ask, you don't know. And I had the most marvelous time, really marvelous time trying so many different amazing dishes. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too of if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. So I think that really applies to a lot of avenues in life. And really, from a goal standpoint with travel and being a culture lover. So if you were to visit every country in the world, you would be able to put, a cap on that and say, I have achieved success in that way. There's a measurable way to say you've done that if you visited every country. There's a numerical thing you could do with that. But Janice, what is your definition of success as a whole? Whether, you could target this from a business standpoint, from a, relationship standpoint, but how do you define the term success?
When you're living the life you actually want to live.
Short and sweet. I love that.
Yeah,
I think,
it really is. It's, you can have all the material things in the world, but if you are not happy with them, you are constantly looking for more stuff. And I actually wrote an article about this. There was a point where I had a very materialistic life and, post-divorce, post-cancer, I really had this moment where I had to focus on what exactly was important to me. And when I embarked on this 2-year sabbatical of traveling, I focused on if I died tomorrow, what was it that I would be really remiss at not doing? Taking my children, of course, off the table, because that's, a given. But what about for me? And I realized it was traveling, and it wasn't about just ticking a box. It was, I really wanted to see every single place because God, I have the worst case of FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
God forbid I'm in a place and I miss something and someone says, oh, did you see? That is the worst thing you could say to me.
Yeah.
Because I will be like, oh, and so I keep these running lists on every country. So if I do miss something in a country, you never know when you can end up passing through a country or it's on the way to another country and you can make a stop. And if something is really important that I missed, I can add it back in and so that I could go back. Or sometimes I just want to enjoy every single place. So for me, it's really not ticking a box. But then the other thing was I always did want to go back to school and to go to Harvard. And I just thought my time had passed. And I thought, I'm older. I'm 58. I just thought it was a missed opportunity. And when my daughter was applying to school and she was trying to figure out what schools to apply to, I said, well, aren't you going to apply to Harvard? Because when we had done the college tour, we stopped at Harvard and I thought it was the most amazing school. And I when I stepped on that campus, I thought, oh my God, this is just unbelievable. I wish I had the opportunity to go here. And it wasn't the right school for her. And so she said to me, if you want to go, you go. And I was like, yeah, I'm going. I'm 58 years old. And she's like, why not? And, she's like, I think they're, this year during the pandemic, they're waiving the GREs and the GMATs. So I was like, really? And I ended up applying. And it was a major, I didn't expect to get in, but it was a major tick the box for me of life goals. And I realized you get one life. You want to do things that are really meaningful to you yourself. And so for me, success is my getting to travel the way I love to travel and doing the things I want to do, like going to school. That is complete success to me, and working on the projects that I love, that's success. Having another pair of shoes or a handbag, that's not success. Driving a great car, that's not success to me. Just doing the life I want to live, that is success. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly sounds successful to me. If you're able to do what you want to do and lead the life that you want to lead, that really is. I mean, that's a great definition of success. I have another question built off of that really has become the core question of the Eric Mueller Show. And that is, the podcast is aimed to explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick and stay driven. So I want to ask you, Janice, what is the one single driving force that keeps your inner clock ticking towards success?
I never give up. And to me, no is just, and it's not acceptable. When I feel that there is an injustice to someone or something, I am going to remedy that injustice. And I never, ever give up. I'm working now. One of the projects that I just had a success with last week was the over-the-counter hearing aid regulations, which the new proposal. I've been working on that project since 2009. I was told, I didn't understand why hearing aids were so expensive. I didn't understand why I couldn't get clarity of what I was purchasing for $8,000. And I was determined to figure out why. And just because something is been done that way for a long time, to me, does not mean it has to continue. And so I was driven by what I viewed as an injustice to people with hearing loss of purchasing really expensive hearing aids with no information. And so I am really driven by fixing injustices. And I love doing it. And people said it couldn't be done. And I think a lot of people underestimate me. And I was really, really proud when the FDA published the rules and cited my FDA testimony in the footnote. That's what drives me, helping people. I really love to help people who I feel are marginalized.
Yeah. And I know that, for those of you listening, I'll tag this in the show notes, but you also contribute. You're a contributor on tellhershecant.com. So I know that Tell Her She Can't is a book by Kelly Lewis. But I think, your articles in that space probably have a lot to do with, from a woman's standpoint, just basically fighting for equality in a sense. Is that correct?
Yes and no. It's just, I have always fought for people, including myself, who feel marginalized, and
Sure.
people, whether it's fixing a printer and getting, the thing to not print too side, I just want to fix things. I'm a problem solver. And I really dislike when people say, it's just been that way. Well, fix it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really know why, but this is just something that is my personal pet peeve. When someone tells me it's just that way, I'm like, no, it's not. And it's going to change.
Yep. Yeah. That's a great entrepreneurial mind.
It always does. I rarely am unable to solve a problem because I have a really deep stick-to-itiveness to a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned, the drive that you have and just, not ever giving up. So I think, that is such a powerful mindset to have. And I think I know for me, it's very tough to adopt that into everyday life, 100% of the time. There's days where it feels like, maybe becoming an entrepreneur maybe is not my future. And then I think, well, self-doubt and those types of things. So, what tips do you have, Janice, to persist through and to not give up, especially in the entrepreneurial journey? You hear it time and time again, it's a grind. You might fail 10 plus times before you succeed. So what advice do you have for those of us out there that are pursuing entrepreneurship and need to know to not give up?
Couple of things. One, I never view it, and I was having a conversation with a friend recently, Ruth. I never feel like I failed. So when I may not succeed initially, I just view it as I need to fine tune whatever I was doing. And so if it didn't work the first time, it just means I may need to work hard and I may need to change something. But I don't view that as a failure. So, for example, with the FDA ruling, I tried filing a petition in 2009 and the FDA didn't accept it. And I couldn't figure out why. So I tried again and I tried something else. And then when there was an opportunity to testify, I testified. And in between had spoken to Senator Warren. And then the rule and the law was languishing. So I tried again, and suddenly the time was right. It was a different era. And so my petition this year was accepted. So I didn't view the 2009 as a failure. It wasn't just the right time. And I had to pivot and I had to figure out how to fix it. So I tried something else. Yeah. So one of the ways of constantly, sometimes things, it's just has nothing to do with you as a person. It has to do with just timing. So I have, how you have in the GDP, you have a basket full of products, and the GNP, the gross national product, you have a basket full of products. I have a basket full of projects that I'm working on, very diverse projects. And so when one slows down, I move to another project. Sometimes it could be, for example, the people in office. Like, for example, in New York City, we have a mayor who, in my opinion, I can't move past projects. He's on his way out next week, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But so I have to kind of sit him out. Sometimes it could be a president I have to sit out. Sometimes it could be an industry I have to sit out. So I have to sometimes move away from a project, put that on hold, and move to another one. And then, like the Smithsonian, I've been working on that project since 2005. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But I maintain it. I maintain a phone log so that when I need to go back to that project, I know exactly where I left off last time. I know the last time I spoke, what the next step is. And so when an opportunity arises, I can quickly go back to that project. So in the current appropriations bill, there's a paragraph about hearing access in the Smithsonian because I had an opportunity where suddenly that project could move forward.
Yeah.
And I had a history of working on that from 2005. Now, what is interesting is sometimes putting something on hold actually benefits you because, for example, in the advocacy world, you're now going back and you're saying, listen, I've been working on this project for 16 years. This is insane. And here's all the documentation. Here's the article I wrote about it for HuffPost. The time waiting actually helps you, right? Because that's a long time. Nobody should have to work to add hearing access at the Smithsonian for 16 years, right? A year, people. So sometimes the delay can actually work to your advantage. But it wasn't like I was just sitting at my computer screen staring at the Smithsonian project. I worked on other projects in between. Also, then by moving and shifting, I had successes with other projects, which helped with my credibility so that when I came back and I returned to the Smithsonian, I had built up this other credibility that helped me lift up the Smithsonian. So having many projects and pivoting, and I think that's one thing you learn from travel is sometimes you can be on a trip and it doesn't work out quite the way you think it's going to, and you have to shift and you have to be flexible. And you learn how you may have to change cities. You may not be able to go to the museum you wanted to because they closed and whatever reason. You learn to be flexible. Same with projects. And I think having a lot of projects you're working on at a time helps because you're not 100% vested in one single project.
Yeah. I know that resonates with me specifically. I mean, I have my hands in a lot of different projects. I've got, a lot of different passions and sometimes I feel like I'm spreading myself too thin, but it feels good to hear you say that, if you need to put one, on a break for a little bit and focus on it later, when you come back to it, in your case, I mean, certain things move with politics and administrative type features, but, your project by just setting it, if you're writing a book and you just set it to the side for a little bit, come back to it later, your mind might be refreshed and you might have better ideas and you might have a renewed perspective on that. So I think that I really do appreciate you saying that, Janice.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you end up having a fresh perspective that you see things you didn't see before. And sometimes a roadblock, there may be an opening within the roadblock that you may have not seen before just because you were too close to it. And sometimes sometimes you just really can't solve the problem at that given time. And there are lots of reasons why. Just put it aside, move on to something else, and then you come back to it with a fresh perspective.
Absolutely.
But I never view them as failures. I just view them as putting it to the side. That's a great
way to view it. I mean, that's a very not give up mindset of viewing it. So I appreciate you. I appreciate that sentiment there, Janice. And I want to be respectful of your time, and I really do appreciate you being a guest on the show. Thank you so much for sharing, your expertise, and I think everybody will learn a lot by going to your website and reading about your company. I'll tag all of that in the show notes, so everyone definitely go check out Janice's website, her personal website, as well as her company. She's featured in a lot of articles. I mean, she's got her hands in a lot of cool things, so definitely give her a check out. And Janice, thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you, Eric, so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have a great evening.
You too.